There was no siren, no rising whine, no warning in the sky. The explosion came first, sudden, vertical, impossible to place. Buildings collapsed before anyone understood what had happened. By the time the sound reached the streets, the damage was already done. London had been hit by something it could not hear. Within minutes, reports flooded in. No aircraft, no bombers, no radar contact. Whatever had struck the city had arrived faster than sound and vanished just as completely. But this was not a mystery to everyone. Months earlier, a scientist inside British intelligence had warned that a new weapon was coming. A weapon that would fall without warning. A weapon that radar could not see, fighters could not intercept, and sirens could not announce. He had proved it with calculations, intercepted data, and hard physics. And still, the city was unprepared. When the V-2 rocket finally struck London, it did not reveal a failure of defense. It revealed a failure of belief. The warning had been accurate. The science had been sound. The problem was timing, because the truth had arrived before the world was ready to accept it. The man who understood this weapon best was not in a bunker or laboratory. He was waiting for confirmation he hoped would never come. His name was R.V. Jones. And when the silence broke, Britain learned what it meant to face a danger that could be proven, but not prevented. By 1943, Britain believed it understood the air war. The Blitz had passed. Radar networks watched the skies. Fighters could be scrambled within minutes. Sirens, shelters, and routines had turned fear into something manageable. London was bruised, but no longer blind. That confidence was about to become irrelevant. Germany was losing the conventional air campaign. Bombers were intercepted. Losses mounted. Surprise was gone. To restore it, German planners turned away from aircraft and toward physics. The solution was not stealth, but speed, so extreme that warning would become impossible. A weapon faster than sound. Long before it appeared, fragments of its existence surfaced. Test ranges on the Baltic coast, unusual telemetry, intercepts that spoke of trajectories, fuel mixtures, and altitudes no bomber could reach. To most analysts, the data looks speculative, interesting, but disconnected. To one scientist, it formed a coherent picture. R.V. Jones saw what others did not because he asked a different question. Not what Germany was building, but what problem it was trying to solve. If bombers could no longer penetrate defenses, the answer was not better aircraft. It was a weapon that removed defense entirely. Jones calculated ranges, velocities, and descent angles. He compared intercepted measurements with known physics. The conclusion was unavoidable. A ballistic missile aimed at cities, arriving before it could be heard, detected, or stopped. The implications were chilling. Radar would not help. Fighters would be useless. Sirens would sound only after impact, if at all. Civil defense, refined through years of bombing, would fail at the moment it was needed most. The city would be struck blind. Jones pushed the warning upward. The response was cautious. The weapon described was unprecedented. The resources required to build it seemed extravagant for a Germany already under strain. Some believed it to be exaggeration or even deception, an attempt to divert Allied attention and resources. Others accepted the possibility, but saw no practical countermeasure worth prioritizing. What could you prepare for when interception was impossible? This hesitation mattered because preparation was the only defense left. Even if the weapon could not be stopped, its effects could be mitigated. Shelters could be reinforced. Emergency response reorganized. Public expectations adjusted. But these steps required belief before proof, and proof would only arrive with casualties. As months passed, the intelligence remained precise but abstract. No explosions confirmed it. No wreckage validated it. The warning stayed trapped in the space between certainty and acceptance. Then the first rocket fell. It struck without warning, without sound, without the rituals Britain had learned to rely on. The city reacted as it always had, after the fact. Only then did the warning transform from theory into reality. This is why the moment matters. Because the failure was not one of knowledge, it was one of timing. The science was right. The intelligence was sound. But the truth arrived too early to compel action and too late to prevent the consequences. In wars defined by speed, belief often lags behind evidence. And when belief finally catches up, the damage has already been done. Arbaugh v. Jones was not a man shaped by explosions or front lines. He was shaped by questions. Trained as a physicist, Jones learned early to trust what numbers revealed rather than what appearances suggested. Where others saw scattered reports and half-understood intercepts, he saw systems, patterns governed by laws that did not bend to optimism or disbelief. In intelligence work, this made him both invaluable and difficult. His conclusions were precise, but they often arrived before consensus was ready to follow. During the war, Jones operated in a space that rewarded neither caution nor certainty. He worked with fragments, partial measurements, intercepted conversations, blurred reconnaissance photographs, and was asked to turn them into warnings strong enough to move governments. This was never simple. Intelligence was expected to confirm fears already held, not introduce dangers that seemed impossible. The V-2 warning placed Jones directly against that expectation. Ballistic missiles challenged the entire logic of air defense. Everything Britain had built, radar stations, fighter control, siren networks, was designed around detection and response. Jones was describing a weapon that removed both. It would fall vertically. It would arrive faster than sound. It would offer no warning and no chance to intercept. The concept sounded less like warfare than science fiction. Jones knew that disbelief would be his greatest obstacle. He did not argue emotionally. He calculated. He reconstructed trajectories from intercepted data. He compared fuel consumption with engine thrust. He demonstrated that the mathematics allowed for exactly the kind of weapon he was describing. To him, the conclusion was not speculative. It was inevitable. But inevitability does not persuade institutions built on precedent. Every warning Jones issued carried an unspoken challenge. If this is true, then much of what you rely on is already obsolete. Accepting that meant admitting vulnerability at a moment when morale mattered. It meant preparing for a threat that could not be countered, only endured. Jones watched as his warnings were acknowledged carefully and then filed. Not rejected outright, but delayed, softened, reframed. Resources went elsewhere. Planning continued around threats that could still be fought. He understood the logic, even as it frustrated him. Governments are not built to act on certainty alone. They act on what can be seen, explained, and managed. The V-2 offered none of that. It demanded belief before evidence, preparation without prevention. By the time Jones's calculations were no longer questioned, the weapon was already being fueled. The tragedy of his role was not that he was ignored. It was that he was believed just enough to be correct, and not enough to be decisive. His warning existed in the narrow space between knowledge and action, where truth is recognized but not yet trusted. When the first rocket struck London, Jones did not feel vindicated. He felt something closer to inevitability confirmed. The mathematics had not changed. Only the cost of delay had become visible. In that moment, his work was no longer about prediction. It was about understanding what comes next when the future arrives without warning. The second rocket fell before the first could be understood. There were still no sirens, no pattern to follow. Streets that had survived years of bombing were suddenly shattered without warning, while neighborhoods that expected impact remained untouched. Fear lost its direction. People could no longer run toward shelters because there was no moment to run from. London was being struck by a weapon that rewrote time itself. For civil defense, the implications were devastating. Every lesson learned during the Blitz depended on anticipation, on hearing engines, reading radar, following procedure. The V-2 erased anticipation. Response came only after destruction. Ambulances arrived to scenes already cold, rescuers working through rubble with no certainty that another strike would not follow seconds later. The warning Jones had issued now shaped reality. Officials scrambled to adjust, not by stopping the rockets, but by managing their aftermath. Damage control replaced interception. Psychological resilience replaced deterrence. The government altered reporting to prevent panic, downplaying the nature of the attacks even as casualties mounted. If the public could not be protected, it could at least be steadied. Militarily, the options were limited. The launch sites were mobile and heavily defended. Intelligence raced to locate them, but the window between launch and impact was too short to exploit. Airstrikes disrupted some operations, but never enough to end the threat. Britain could not fight the weapon directly. It could only endure it. Germany's intent was clear. The V-2 was not designed to win the war. It was designed to terrorize, to fracture morale, to demonstrate a technological supremacy that might alter political resolve. It arrived too late to change the strategic balance, but early enough to exact a human cost. Jones watched the consequences with a grim clarity. Everything he had predicted unfolded precisely because the physics allowed no alternative. Speed defeated warning. Vertical descent defeated detection. The weapon did exactly what it was built to do. The tragedy was not surprise, it was inevitability realized. As weeks passed, the attacks continued sporadically. London learned to live with randomness. Fear became diffuse, unanchored. The absence of warning proved more corrosive than the explosions themselves. People could not adapt to a threat they could not anticipate. And yet the war moved on. Allied advances accelerated elsewhere. Resources were directed toward ending the conflict rather than countering a weapon that could not reverse its outcome. The V-2 campaign bled civilians but changed nothing strategically. It remained a demonstration of possibility rather than a path to victory. That contrast is what makes this moment pivotal. The warning had been correct. The science had been precise. But the window for prevention had closed before belief could catch up. When the rockets finally stopped, they left behind a lesson written not in victory or defeat, but in limits. Limits of defense, limits of preparation, limits of what knowledge can change when action depends on certainty rather than probability. The V-2 did not break Britain, but it proved something far more unsettling, that the future can be calculated, explained, and still arrive unchecked, if believing it feels too dangerous to act upon in time. When the war ended, the V-2 quickly became a symbol rather than a warning. It was remembered as the world's first ballistic missile, a technological curiosity pulled from the ruins of defeat. Engineers studied it. Superpowers raced to replicate it. The weapon's legacy was absorbed into the future, space programs, rockets, and the Cold War, while its human cost faded into abstraction. In that transformation, the warning was lost. R.V. Jones did not fit the post-war narrative. He had not commanded armies or flown missions. He had not stopped the weapon. His success lay in prediction, not prevention, and history struggles to honor those who were right when being right changed nothing. There was also an uncomfortable truth embedded in his story. To fully acknowledge Jones's warning would require admitting that Britain knew the V-2 was coming and could do almost nothing to stop it. That admission challenged the comforting idea that intelligence and preparation always translate into protection. It revealed a harsher reality. Some threats arrive before defenses can exist. So the emphasis shifted. The story became about resilience rather than foresight, about how London endured, not how it had been warned. The intelligence work that predicted the weapon was reduced to technical footnotes, eclipsed by the drama of survival and the spectacle of innovation. Jones himself remained largely invisible. His calculations were precise. His conclusions were correct. But he did not offer a victory, only clarity. And clarity without a solution is rarely celebrated. It raises questions without providing closure. It forces history to confront moments where knowledge arrived early and action arrived too late. Even within intelligence circles, the V-2 episode was treated carefully. It was a case study in limits, not success. And limits do not inspire myth. So the warning faded. The name of the scientist who proved the impossible became secondary to the weapon that made it real. History moved forward, carrying the technology with it and leaving the foresight behind. Yet that omission matters, because forgetting the warning allows us to believe that surprise is inevitable, that no one could have known, and that belief protects us from asking a harder question. What happens when we do know, and still cannot act in time? The V-2 changed the meaning of warning. Before it, danger announced itself. Engines could be heard. Blips appeared on screens. Time existed between detection and impact. After it, time collapsed. The future arrived without introduction. Major V. Jones understood this before anyone else. His legacy is not a weapon or a system, but a realization that intelligence can outrun defense and that foresight does not guarantee safety. In a world of accelerating technology, that lesson has only grown more relevant. Modern cities now live under threats that mirror the V-2's logic. Speed without warning, impact before reaction. The tools have changed. The dilemma has not. Jones's story reminds us that prediction is not the same as control, that proving a danger exists does not mean society is ready to confront it, and that the most unsettling warnings are often the ones that offer no clear solution, only the certainty that something is coming. History prefers stories where knowledge saves the day. This one is different. It is a story where knowledge arrived early, clearly, and accurately, and still failed to prevent harm. Not because it was ignored, but because belief demanded more than evidence. When the rockets finally stopped falling, Britain survived. But the silence they left behind carried a question that still echoes. If a danger can be proven, explained, and still allowed to strike, what does that say about how we decide when to act? That is the legacy of the V-2 warning. Not a failure of science, not a failure of intelligence, but a reminder that the future does not wait for us to be ready to believe it.